Hi, welcome today on how to beat your wife. Hey, just kidding. Actually, I'm going to be using my 1988 F250 7.3 IDI for an example on fuel tanks and how they work, and the same principles apply through all vehicles that are combustible via gas or diesel.
Okay, so here we're looking at, this is the rear of my pickup truck. This is the rear tank in the back. We're going to start off with definitions, and that's the front tank. On these older vehicles, it looks like this. You have an F up here, up top, that's front tank, and that's the rear. You can switch this even while running. That's just how these work. Hey, and if you're having trouble switching between your tanks, I suggest you go to this little solenoid. You verify that you have voltage coming from your pigtail, and then you verify that your coil for your solenoid isn't burned up as well. And if it is going bad, it won't be able to switch in between your tanks. So I'm going to show you where that is for Ford. And here we are, just right in front of the front tank for this 1988, and you can see that it sits right there. Looks like that. Now mine has been piggybacked in too, but there's no issue with my switching, so I'm not going to worry about any of this. But this is midway on the driver's side for Ford, and all vehicles that have two tanks function off the same exact principle. Looks like that. Let's keep moving on for the sake of definitions. Okay, on every single fuel tank, you have an atmospheric vent tube. This tube on top is meant to keep the pressure equal as it is inside the tank as it is outside the tank. It is supposed to work both ways. If I was to put my mouth on the end of this, I could blow and suck, and that's the way this is supposed to be.
And by me blowing and sucking on that hose with my mouth, because I wasn't hailing that would have been really gross. Ew. So by me doing that, I have verified that there is no trouble with the ventilation that would cause a lot of vehicle stalling and such like that.
For this specific year, make, and model, my color is this bluish looking green. Different cars will vary, and it's this line right here. Looks like that. Then the other line, we'll get into that here in a second, that's for my gauge and everything. Looks like this. You have a side that creates a vacuum, and for this older vehicle, the vacuum is created from a mechanical pump that is mounted on the lower side front of the engine block. And then secondly, we have, of course, the return, and the return just spits it back into the fuel tank, and it has that little orange guy. Looks like that. Looks factory. I'm going to leave him alone. Just a moment ago, we talked about some ventilation. Well, now I want to talk about the filler neck, and we'll go back to the signal for the dash here in just a moment, but this part I wanted to bring up. Behold, this is the fuel cap. If yours is damaged, cracked, it is very important that you replace it for obvious reasons. So moisture and like grit cannot get inside of your fuel tank. So for this particular make and model, you can see a little slit that's way down there. Well, that is actually the return for the air that's being pushed out of the fuel tank, right? Nozzle goes in the hole, and so air must come back out. That's how these work. That's how every filler neck ever designed for any vehicle works. So if you're having troubles with that, you might want to check, because this thing's probably kinked, to be honest. If it's not kinked, then when's the last time you went mudding? Because, well, if that's the case, you got a serious problem. Again, this one is for operation ventilation, and this one is for fueling operation. Fueling. 8mm on the hose clamp. Looks like that. Fuel comes out the small hose right there, and air goes back up the big hose right there. So if it's kinked, well, you're going to have a lot of problems. Trust me, I'm telling you by experience. If you are trying to remove this so you can pull this off in maintenance or fix whatever, check whatever, the way how you get these off, you can see how that one right there is broke. It's because I've already removed this one to replace both of these tanks on this truck. But what you do is you take just a flathead with a hammer and you hit this ring. Now you'll probably break a couple of those, but that's just the nature of the beast. So it looks like this. Remember, lefty, loosey, ready, tighty. You could see how this little ring looks like this, and it's held down by these right here. Fingers, call them whatever, but basically locks it in. So lefty, loosey, and you whack that, and it pops it right off. When you're reassembling this, I suggest using just any old petroleum base grease, anything really, and that way it creates a really good seal, and this doesn't get pinched or bound up when you're trying to put it on. This seal is manufactured to take petroleum grease so it will not corrode any different. Let's talk a little bit about the float. This is a float right here. These do eventually go bad, but it takes many, many years. This vehicle is, I think, I forget, 35 years old? I don't know. Old. But this is original, and it still works. Even this works. The signal is sent down through one wire. Not going to get into which. It's irrelevant at this moment. And then, depending on this, it becomes kind of a potentiometer, which changes the value on the inside of this. That signal is sent back through the other wire, and it goes to your dash, and it's affiliated with that circuit. I'm not going to get into the wiring of that because I'm trying to stay broad.
Okay, got it pressed up against the window, and now I'm going to manually move the float. See how it went up a little bit like that? Pulling up on it, pulling up on that. That's how it works. I let it go and it fell back down, and you can see how that works. Remember that most modern vehicles, their fuel pumps are actually on the inside of the tank. This is considered old school at this point. And again, vacuum is created off of my colored line here, as my gray line is my return. And you can see over here, this one looks a bit different. More bluish, I would definitely say. You're like, boy, that is not just blue, that's navy blue. Moving right along now. So the older Fords in the 1980 to 1996, give or take, blah, 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 a few years, there's this terrible thing that I believe is actually a recall, and some Fords, not all, got fixed. The recall is actually on the straps for the fuel tanks because there's nothing there to absorb the vibrations, and so over time with all the vehicle shaking and stuff, it's actually rubbing through the tank, and on the inside of the tank, since it's metal, we'll talk about it here in just a second, it's creating a thin spot. Well, you could put anything in between there, a piece of rubber. I did that, so theoretically I'll never have to change my tanks again, which I already did because of this recall that never got addressed.
You can see this over here. There's my strap I put on. It's just a rubberized strap pretty much. I think it's like a weather stripping you could pick up at any of your stores that you can find, like rubber molding or anything like that. There's my bolt to undo the strap right there. Over here, here's the other one. It's actually on this part of the frame. Take a good look at it. It sits right there, and that's how you drop it. I suggest having a couple friends help you out with this. It'll be a lot easier. Same thing over here. Here's a bolt, and there's a bolt over there. Okay? And you can change your tanks without removing the bed of your truck. Again, I have the truck bed off of mine for demonstrational purposes, and I'm fixing a whole bunch of other stuff. So, off came the bed. Now, let's talk about plastic, the HDPE ones, yeah, for gasoline, and the metal ones. What's better? What do I suggest, and why? Okay, so plastic, it expands and contracts a lot better than what metal does. You know, what if this is more like tinfoil? Everyone knows the more you move metal around, it becomes softer and softer, eventually breaks. Well, plastic here, she could take all kinds of abuse. Hey, just like my wife, bro. So first, let's assume that you were in a car crash and the impact has basically compromised your frame, and plastic is gonna basically morph in position a lot better if it's hit rather than metal. It'll obviously has a better chance of leaking. Also, the way that these are made, in some foreign country where workers are treated so equally, we can assume that the part where that these are pinched are not always the best, and these are points of where they could, if they're not pressed correctly, come undone.
My favorite thing! Let's talk about corrosion, shall we?
Alright, found my state-of-the-art fluid checker, and what we're going to do is we're going to see how much rust has actually formed in this metal tank since I replaced it last, I think, 2 years ago. And I'll show you why I don't like metal tanks. I prefer the plastic ones. Alright, I'm now sticking my gadget in here to show you why I complain. Don't know if you could see that, but there I'm stirring up little sediments that have already penetrated the inside of my tank. Now, it's not that bad. Not that bad, but if this vehicle was many, many years older, you would see this would be a lot worse. And then I'll show you kind of up on the wall what it looks like. See how the very bottom of it looks discolored and all that? Wow! Now you can see why everyone's doing away with the metal tanks. Oh, and by the way, there are a couple bolts back here for the straps. So hey, I hope you enjoyed this video. I spent a great deal of my time explaining, showing, teaching, if you're learning. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.